Alright, pull the chair in close, because what I am about to walk you through is not a beef, and it is not a rap feud, and it is not another timeline argument about who won which round. This is a case file, and the case file has a laughing emoji stapled to the front of it. 12 minutes. That was the whole window. 12 minutes between the second Rick Ross tapped the record button in a Miami swimming pool and the second 50 Cent typed 3 letters that turned the entire round off like a light switch. LOL. 3 characters. 1 decade of preparation behind them. And if you still believe this story is about an album called Set in Stone, I have to be honest with you. You are already reading the wrong page. Because here is the piece that gets skipped by everybody else covering this. The pool footage, the shirtless yelling, the government name blurted into a phone camera, the Shreveport misdirection, the 20 features that could not push a project past 10,000 copies, the coach class frontier flight, the $35 million mortgage stacked against a $35 million house, and the sudden hush inside the Maybach Music front office are not separate stories. They are one story, and that story is not a beef. That story is a slow, patient, surgical dismantling that started long before anyone hit live. Sit tight. Lock the door on the group chat. Because the version of this that has been circulating on timelines all week is the polite version. And the polite version leaves out the only part that actually matters. The polite version wants you to believe 2 grown men got into a slap fight on the internet. The polite version wants you to believe this is entertainment. The polite version wants you scrolling to the next clip inside a minute. But the real version, the version we're going to build together right here, is going to change the way you look at hip-hop for the rest of the decade. Let me reset the room before anything else, because before you understand why 50 Cent chose 3 letters over 3 paragraphs, you have to understand what 50 Cent actually is in 2026 and what Rick Ross actually is in 2026. These are not the 2 men who traded verses in 2008. In 2008, this was a mixtape war. It was a fight over who moved more units at a Best Buy in Queens or a Sam Goody in Miami Gardens. It was street clout. It was cover story clout. It was a magazine cover argument about who had the harder story on wax. In 2026, one of these men owns 4 spin-off television franchises inside a single flagship universe, holds a spirits portfolio pushing 9 figures a year, sits on a 9-figure entertainment development agreement with the state of Louisiana, cuts ribbons on a working film and television campus in Shreveport, and quietly repositioned his headquarters into a Manhattan office that looks less like a rap label and more like a Warner subsidiary. That man is 50 Cent. The other man owns a stunning estate in Georgia that costs nearly $1 million a year just to keep the porch lights on. Owns a Star Island mansion refinanced 3 separate times inside 3 calendar years. Owns a champagne endorsement that Rick Ross has publicly fronted for 13 straight years with no verifiable ownership percentage disclosed anywhere in the public record. And owns a new album that debuted with 20 guest features and still could not clear the number that a bedroom SoundCloud kid can hit before dinner. That man is Rick Ross. Same argument. Different weight class. Different sport entirely. Now here is the detail nobody wants to say into a microphone. The wound is not the album. The wound is the wings. Rewind the clip and freeze it at the pool. Because when 50 Cent hit send on the joke about tickets that do not sell and albums that do not move, so you have to promote car shows and slang chicken wings, Rick Ross did not respond that day. Did not respond that night. Did not respond the next morning. Rick Ross responded only after the wings joke traveled every group chat in hip-hop and lodged itself in the culture like a splinter. That delay is not a coincidence. That delay is a psychological tell. That delay is the exact moment a rapper stops being a rapper and starts being a defendant. The album jokes were survivable. Album jokes can be shrugged off with a talk of streaming eras and Drake-loyal playlists and hostile algorithms. But the Wings joke touched a different nerve entirely. The Wings joke touched the pivot. The Wings joke reminded the entire industry that the reason a small side business exists is because the big business has stopped feeding. And the moment 50 Cent located that button, 50 Cent has been pressing it every single day since. Rick Ross has been reacting to that pressure on a clockwork schedule. Here is another layer of the Wings problem people are not saying out loud. A wing chain, in the abstract, is a fine business. Nothing wrong with a wing chain. There are men and women out there running fried food franchises who are quietly worth 8 and 9 figures. But the Wings joke never actually targeted the Wings. The Wings joke targeted the visible collapse of arena-level money into fast casual money. It was a reminder that a decade ago, Rick Ross was talking about private planes and boat weekends, and today Rick Ross is talking about franchise real estate and cross-promotional car meets. The optics of that pivot are the wound. The Wings are just the bandage. And 50 Cent knows the difference between a bandage and a wound better than anybody in this industry. Let us walk this back to the numbers, because numbers are the only witness in this courtroom that cannot be intimidated. Set in Stone landed with 20 features. 20. Meek Mill on it. Whale on it. Jadakiss on it. A stacked deck across coasts, across eras, across the whole Maybach music universe of allies. And that album debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200 with 19,000 equivalent album units in its first week. 19,000 across 20 features means every guest verse averaged 950 units of contribution. That is not a rollout. That is a group chat that got monetized. And before Billboard even certified the official figure, a viral whisper was already ripping through the culture that Set in Stone had only moved around 2,000 pure copies in its opening frame. Whether that specific figure was verifiable stopped mattering the instant 50 Cent screenshotted a caption and wrote, laughing out loud, "The jig is up, 20 features under 10,000 sales, damn boy, it is over." That caption traveled further than any single from Set in Stone ever will. That caption became the album's real marketing campaign. And the darker piece of the tragedy is that 50 Cent did not need a diss track to accomplish that. 50 Cent used a caption. Because when 50 Cent operates on this level, weapons that used to require a studio session now fit inside the palm of a phone. Think about that for a second. Really let it sit. There was a version of this beef in 2008 where a response required a booth, an engineer, a beat, a distributor, a leak strategy, a mixtape DJ, and a 2-week runway of anticipation. And there is a version of this beef in 2026 where the response is a screenshot with 3 letters and a period. Same result. 1/100th of the effort. That gap is the story. That gap is what happens when one man built infrastructure and the other man built imagery. But listen carefully now, because here is where the story darkens. Here is where every other breakdown floating around this week stops short. The caption is only the surface. The caption is only the shrapnel. The bomb was buried years ago. Rewind to a Patrick Bet David podcast episode. Rick Ross sits in a plush chair with the studio lights hot. Millions of eyes on the feed. And Rick Ross says out loud, 50 does not own his music, does not own the show power, lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, is not making real money. Then Rick Ross throws in a joke about 50 Cent needing to strap on scuba gear and scrub the bottom of a yacht. Rick Ross walks off that set feeling like a scoreboard just clicked in his favor. But somewhere inside a corner office in Manhattan, a completely different scoreboard was already running the same math. Because a man who has actually built a media empire does not respond to accusations of not owning his empire by tweeting back. A man who has actually built a media empire opens a drawer, pulls the paperwork, and lets the paperwork breathe on its own timeline. That is exactly what 50 Cent did. Every claim Rick Ross made on that podcast collapsed against public record inside a matter of weeks. And every collapse compounded into the next one, and the next one, and the next one. 50 Cent does not own Power. Power is a franchise universe that has now spawned 4 separate spin-off series. Every single one of them produced through G-Unit Film and Television. Every single one generating recurring back-end revenue for 50 Cent as an owner, not as a hired face. When the Stars contract renegotiation closed in September of 2022, 50 Cent posted the date to the internet with a caption reading "Official day of really owning my content." That was not chest thumping. That was a receipt. A receipt is a very different thing than a caption. A receipt survives an argument. A caption dies inside one. 50 Cent does not own Masters. The Masters conversation for a man who took equity in Vitamin Water in 2004 and then cashed a payout estimated somewhere between $60 and $100 million when Coca-Cola bought the parent company Glasso, is not a conversation Rick Ross should have volunteered to enter. That single deal is the reason 50 Cent walked through a 2015 bankruptcy filing and came out the other side owning the same television franchise Rick Ross claimed 50 Cent did not own. Think about that. The bankruptcy that was supposed to be the end of 50 Cent turned into the launching pad for the version of 50 Cent that would eventually turn a caption into a scoreboard. 50 Cent lives in a two-bedroom apartment. Coverage adjacent to Architectural Digest from August of 2024 documented marble floors, a wellness spa, a cold plunge, and a full indoor lap pool inside 50 Cent's current residence. The two-bedroom line was a snapshot Rick Ross grabbed from a moment in 2020 and tried to laminate into permanent fact. But permanent fact is a hard thing to fake when the other side keeps documentation. And 50 Cent keeps documentation the way a private equity firm keeps documentation. Everything filed, everything dated, everything discoverable. Now spin the camera the other direction. Because the camera has to be spun. The Star Island mansion Rick Ross purchased in August of 2023 for $35 million, negotiated down from a $37.5 million asking price, closed with $20 million borrowed against the property on day one. In July of 2024, another $4.3 million was borrowed. In March of 2026, another $10.7 million was borrowed. The arithmetic totals a mortgage load of $35 million stacked against a house that cost $35 million. The deal Rick Ross negotiated on paper is now fully mortgaged back to the original ask. Read that again. The house is functionally leased from the lender. The equity is a whisper. The pride of purchase is a paper transaction. In late 2024, the Georgia Department of Revenue filed a $65,000 state tax execution against Rick Ross. A 2021 child support filing obtained by TMZ listed monthly income at $585,000 and ordered $11,000 a month in support. An older 2009 filing that 50 Cent famously aired on the radio showed Rick Ross admitting on paper to spending $7,000 a month more than Rick Ross earned. That paperwork is not internet rumor. That paperwork is a court exhibit. And a court exhibit is a witness that never blinks and never forgets. And the 12-year Luke Belair endorsement. The champagne brand Rick Ross helped build into a cultural institution across 13 years of loyalty has never published a verifiable equity percentage tied to Rick Ross. 13 years of FaceTime with a bottle in hand, and the ownership terms remain a sealed box. Compare that to vitamin water, where every $50 earned exists inside a transaction that was reported by every major business outlet on the planet. One deal is a public record. The other deal is a handshake in a hallway. And handshakes in hallways do not survive a downer. That is the whole chessboard. And Rick Ross walked onto a podcast and called check on a game where Rick Ross was already down the queen, both rooks, and a knight. When you call check from a losing position, all you accomplish is announcing to the entire room that you do not know what a losing position looks like. Now here is the part that turns this from a beef into a case study. Because there is a whisper moving through boardrooms this month. And the whisper is not a diss track. The whisper is a corporate paper trail. According to industry-side reporting circulating in real time, an investment vehicle tied to 50 Cent has been quietly acquiring distressed debt portfolios previously held by a former distribution partner that once carried Maybach Music Group back catalog obligations. Shell entities registered across Delaware, Wyoming, the Cayman Islands. Layered ownership structures that would make a private equity attorney whistle. And the implication of that acquisition, if the paperwork holds up in daylight, is staggering. Because when the same person clowning your album from a caption is the same person who owns the debt behind your touring apparatus, the beef stops being a beef. The beef becomes a garnishment. The beef becomes a collection notice with a laughing emoji stapled to the top. If Rick Ross tours, revenue flows through channels a creditor can touch. If Rick Ross cancels, venue bonds and promoter deposits take a hit. There is no third door. This is a chess game where every piece Rick Ross moves is already covered by a piece 50 Cent placed 4 years ago. And you have to understand what that means in practical terms, because the phrase distressed debt portfolio can slide past the ear if you are not familiar with it. A distressed debt portfolio is a bundle of unpaid or underperforming obligations that a lender writes down at pennies on the dollar to get them off the books. When somebody quietly acquires that portfolio, that somebody now has the legal right to collect on every one of those obligations at the original face value. If a legacy artist has an old distribution advance that was never fully recouped, that obligation could be inside such a portfolio. If a legacy artist has a touring guarantee that was defaulted on during the pandemic era, that obligation could be inside such a portfolio. If a legacy artist has a licensing invoice that a partner walked away from, that obligation could be inside such a portfolio. And the party sitting on top of that portfolio is now, for all intents and purposes, holding the leash. That is why the pool video felt so off. From the outside, it looked like anger. From the inside, if you know what to listen for, it sounded like panic. Rick Ross was not defending an album on that stream. Rick Ross was defending a business model that has been quietly encircled for years. Rick Ross said, "Give them people their money back, Curtis," but nobody in Shreveport is asking for the money back. G-Unit Film and Television Studios is a working campus. Real productions, real payroll, real Louisiana tax credits, real infrastructure poured into a city that needed the investment. When friction with local officials appears, when paperwork misaligns with promises, a smart operator pulls back exposure until alignment returns. That is not theft. That is fiduciary discipline. Somebody who has never sat on the ownership side of a 9-figure operating agreement does not intuitively grasp that. Somebody who has been renting relevance through endorsements does not intuitively grasp that either. And when Rick Ross yelled the government name Curtis into the phone lens, Rick Ross was not landing a punch. Rick Ross was announcing to the internet that Rick Ross had run out of business ammunition and was reaching for the personal drawer. Here is another detail nearly nobody has connected. Rick Ross boarded a Frontier Airlines flight 3 weeks before the album dropped. Passenger cameras captured Rick Ross walking down the aisle of a commercial aircraft. The internet did what the internet does. The Rick Ross camp responded that the private jet was in the shop for a $500,000 Starlink upgrade. Maybe true. Very possibly true. But timing is a witness that never lies. When somebody already carrying a $35 million mortgage on a Star Island property that has been refinanced 3 times, plus a Georgia estate that costs $1 million a year to operate, plus a jet with roughly $1.6 million in annual operating costs across 400 flight hours, plus a lifestyle that requires visible wealth maintenance across every social impression suddenly shows up in a Frontier boarding line. The timing does not read like a maintenance window. The timing reads like a cash flow question. And cash flow questions do not shout. Cash flow questions whisper, which is exactly what the entire industry has been doing about this situation for months. And the Frontier flight is not the only optical crack in the armor. Think about the frequency of the private meet and greet ticket packages that started appearing on secondary platforms months before the album dropped. Think about the recycled promotional footage that started showing up on Rick Ross's socials, footage that was clearly from earlier eras, edited to feel current. Think about the reduction in the guest appearance fee that industry insiders have been quietly commenting on for the last 18 months. Every one of those signals is a data point. And when you stack the data points on top of the tax execution, on top of the child support ledger, on top of the refinanced Star Island property, on top of the endorsement with no disclosed equity, on top of the album that could not clear 10,000 units with 20 features, you are no longer looking at a beef. You are looking at a spreadsheet with a face on it. Now let me name the 5 stages that Rick Ross is publicly cycling through. Because 50 Cent already mapped the entire journey inside a single caption drop. Stage 1. Denial. That was the silence in the opening days after the set and Stone numbers leaked. Rick Ross did not post. Rick Ross did not clap back. Rick Ross let the story breathe, hoping it would suffocate on its own. It did not. Stage 2. Bargaining. That was every attempt to reframe the numbers as a symptom of streaming eras and hostile playlist algorithms. That was the pivot to talking about legacy and catalog in the long tail. All valid frames in the abstract. But the timing of that pivot, arriving in the exact week the sales debate went nuclear, made the frame look like a lifeboat rather than a stance. Stage 3. Anger. That is the pool video. The shirtless yelling. The Curtis chant. The Shreveport deflection totem. The shot at 50 Cent's alleged living arrangement. And anger in the psychology of public conflict is the loudest and simultaneously the weakest stage. Because winners do not yell. Winners do not film live streams in swimwear. Winners smile. Winners screenshot. Winners caption. Winners keep it moving. Stage 4 is depression. That is the coming stage. That is when the pool videos stop. When the phone goes quiet. When appearances get quietly rescheduled. When tour dates begin sliding off the calendar without an official announcement. When the podcast circuit slows down because every host wants to ask about the numbers and no host wants to hear the same reheated defense. When the Instagram grid gets thinner. When the caption energy dulls. When the branding calls slow. Stage 5 is acceptance. That is the stage where Rick Ross returns to a microphone, respects the score, and stops swinging at a battle measured out years ago in a boardroom Rick Ross was never invited into. Acceptance in a public conflict is a very particular sound. It is the sound of somebody laughing at their own joke before anybody else can. It is the sound of somebody dropping a project that stops trying to prove anything and just tries to sound good. It is the sound of a legacy artist becoming a legacy artist on purpose instead of by accident. Here is what makes 50 Cent uniquely dangerous inside a Stage 3 environment. 50 Cent has spent 20 years perfecting the choreography of somebody else's anger. Ja Rule in 2003, Stage 3. Rick Ross the first time around in 2008, Stage 3. Every attempted challenger who ever tried to run a play on 50 Cent, Stage 3. And 50 Cent has never lost inside a Stage 3 environment because 50 Cent does not participate in Stage 3. 50 Cent produces Stage 3. 50 Cent sits inside an air-conditioned room, fully clothed, phone in hand, caption locked, LOL loaded, and lets the opponent do all of the sweating, all of the yelling, all of the reaching. All 50 Cent has to do is screenshot the opponent's own material and repost it with 3 letters. That is the entire operation. Screenshot, caption, post, laugh, repeat. And every screenshot compounds like interest inside a savings account 50 Cent has been depositing into since the Ja Rule era. The choreography of somebody else's anger is a skill set that took years to refine. It requires patience. It requires timing. It requires knowing exactly which comment will trigger the biggest response and which comment will be ignored. It requires an audience that has been trained over 2 decades to expect the next shot. 50 Cent has built that audience one screenshot at a time, one caption at a time, one laugh at a time. And when a challenger walks into that machine, the machine does not need to work overtime. The machine only needs to point the camera in the right direction. Rick Ross walked in front of that camera and started dancing before the music even started playing. There is one more piece of this puzzle nobody has assembled correctly. And it is the piece that turns this from a beef breakdown into a warning shot to the entire music industry. Because the mechanism 50 Cent is running against Rick Ross is not a one-off. It is a template, a reproducible corporate procedure that can be executed against any legacy artist whose lifestyle economics have outscaled recurring cash flow. Any veteran act who spent the last decade financing visibility instead of building ownership. Any name brand rapper whose brand endorsements are opaque, whose real estate is over-leveraged, and whose tour dependencies rely on venue partnerships that can be politely encouraged to reconsider a booking. There is a growing list of legacy artists who fit that description. Rick Ross is not the first candidate this template could reach. Rick Ross is simply the loudest, and therefore the first public demonstration. The next few months will reveal whether other high-visibility, high-liability legacy names get quietly nudged into similar corners. Because the mechanism only requires 2 ingredients. Ingredient 1, a target with visible wealth exceeding actual wealth. Ingredient 2, an operator with patience, capital, and a working knowledge of debt instruments. 50 Cent has spent a full decade acquiring ingredient 2. And ingredient 1 is in surplus across the industry right now. Zoom back out. Because the audience needs to feel the full weight of what actually happened this week. Rick Ross recorded a video in a swimming pool, shirt off, yelling a government name. 50 Cent typed 3 letters. Inside those 3 letters was a decade of legal preparation, a decade of business architecture, a decade of ownership accumulation, a decade of watching, waiting, and never once flinching from the long game. The pool video will be forgotten by Christmas. The Wings jokes will fade by spring. But the corporate paper trail attached to this exchange will still be filed and dated inside a corporate registry somewhere in Delaware, still generating ownership advantage, still reshaping the balance of who actually controls the pipelines that push hip-hop through the culture. The reason 50 Cent laughed instead of writing a paragraph is that the paragraph was already written in legal documents, in equity structures, in production contracts, in development deals. in shell corporations layered like Russian dolls across 3 separate jurisdictions. The caption is the punchline. The mechanism is the joke. And Rick Ross is the audience that did not realize the show was already over. That is the darkest part of any confrontation. The moment where the loser is the last person in the room to figure out the round has already been called. Rick Ross screamed into a pool. The pool screamed back silence. And silence, at that pitch, is the loudest scoreboard in hip-hop. Nobody flinches inside a story like this, except the person still swinging at shadows. And Rick Ross, shirtless in a Miami pool at high noon, yelling into a phone lens about giving people their money back, was swinging at the shadow of a man who quietly bought the pool water years ago. That is the truth every rap blog is dancing around this week. That is the truth that turns 3 letters into a scoreboard. That is the truth 50 Cent understood the moment 50 Cent stopped trying to be the best rapper in the room and started trying to be the only owner in the room. Everybody else in this generation of hip-hop is renting relevance. 50 Cent has been buying the building. Rick Ross is only the first tenant to notice the locks have already been changed. And if the paper trail keeps surfacing the way industry insiders are quietly telling me it will, the next few names on the list are going to wish somebody had warned them before the eviction notice arrived stapled to a laughing emoji. Because the round is over. The album is buried. The pool is drying. And the caption still stands. LOL. 3 letters. 1 scoreboard. 0 flinches. Game. Now here is where I need you locked in with me. Because the deeper truth of this whole exchange is a lesson that most artists in this generation have refused to learn. Rick Ross rented relevance for a solid decade of luxury imagery, financed appearances, endorsement handshakes, and estate photography that photographed beautifully but never generated recurring compounding equity. 50 Cent quietly, methodically, and unglamorously bought ownership stakes across television, spirits, real estate, media production, film financing, and legal debt instruments. While the culture assumed 50 Cent had gone dormant, the Set in Stone album cycle simply supplied the calendar date on which the imbalance became publicly visible. And the pool videos simply supplied the visual thumbnail future business students will attach to the case file. Everybody watching this play out should be taking notes. Because the mechanism does not care about musical talent, does not care about lyrical skill, does not care about legacy respect, does not care about street tenure, does not care about who had the harder run in 1998 or the bigger record in 2006. The mechanism only cares about paperwork. And paperwork does not sleep, does not blink, does not attend award shows, does not respond to captions. Paperwork simply files. Every time paperwork files, another layer of leverage locks into place. Rick Ross is discovering in real time, on camera, in a swimming pool, that the paperwork 50 Cent filed years ago has now grown teeth. Teeth do not laugh. Teeth close. Now here is the part one want you to sit with the longest. Because a lot of people are treating this like sport, and it is not sport. Rick Ross is not a cartoon. Rick Ross is a father, a business operator, an employer of dozens of people whose livelihoods depend on Maybach music remaining solvent, and a cultural figure whose weight in hip-hop is not up for debate. Nobody serious is celebrating a man going through what looks like a public liquidity crisis. But nobody serious can pretend the pattern is invisible either. When the accountant is nervous, the artist gets loud. When the artist gets loud, the fans get confused. When the fans get confused, the algorithm gets an assist because outrage moves faster than truth. And that is exactly how a pool video became a business obituary in 12 minutes. Watch what happens next. Watch the tour calendar. Watch the endorsement renewal cycles. Watch whether Luke Belair quietly refreshes its brand narrative around a younger face. Watch whether the Georgia estate gets listed in the next 12 months. Watch whether the Star Island property is quietly transferred into a trust or restructured into an LLC. Watch whether the Frontier flight was the first budget signal or the only one. Watch whether the 20 features on Set in Stone stay silent as the numbers continue to leak. Watch whether Meek Mill posts anything at all. Watch whether the Maybach Music office in Miami holds a scheduled meeting with a certain law firm that specializes in artist-side restructuring. Watch, because every one of those signals is a chapter in the same case file. And watch 50 Cent, because 50 Cent will keep smiling. We'll keep captioning. We'll keep screenshotting. We'll keep laughing. And every laugh will be another deposit into a compounding account that has been earning interest since the Ja Rule era. That is not cruelty. That is arithmetic. Arithmetic dressed as comedy. And nobody in hip-hop right now is doing that math with a sharper pencil than Curtis Jackson. One more angle before I let you go, because I want you to think about how this reshapes the way the next generation of rappers should be building. Ownership is not optional anymore. Endorsement checks are not equity. A face on a bottle is not a stake in the company. A song on a soundtrack is not a piece of the film. A stage in a stadium is not a percentage of the tour. If you cannot answer the question of who owns the paperwork, then the paperwork owns you. That is the lesson buried in the pool water. That is the lesson every young artist should be memorizing while the current generation of legacy names finds out the hard way. And that is the lesson 50 Cent has been shouting silently for 15 years while everybody else was shouting on wax. The paperwork keeps the receipts. And let me push that lesson one step further, because a lot of you watching this are not artists. A lot of you watching this are the people who bought the album, streamed the songs, wore the merch, and stood in the crowd at the shows. You are the people whose loyalty built both of these empires in different ways. And what this story is really showing you is that the person on the stage with the loudest chain is not always the person with the biggest bank account. The person on the stage is often the person paying for the biggest chain out of a shrinking pot, while the person nowhere near the stage is quietly buying the venue the stage sits inside. Loud is not rich. Rich is quiet. Rich signs the paperwork. Rich waits. Rich screenshots. Rich laughs. And when Rich laughs, the whole room hears it even though Rich never raised his voice. Look at the calendar for a second, because timelines matter here. Rick Ross bought the Star Island house in August of 2023. $20 million borrowed on day one. In July of 2024, an additional $4.3 million borrowed. In late 2024, the Georgia tax execution filed. In the same window, 50 Cent's Shreveport campus starts announcing productions. In March of 2026, the Star Island house gets refinanced again, another $10.7 million borrowed. And then, only months later, the set in stone rollout arrives. 20 features, 19,000 units, a pool video, a caption, a laugh. If you lay that calendar flat on a table and look at it from above, it does not look like a beef timeline. It looks like a burn rate chart. And a burn rate chart never lies, no matter how loud the person burning through it screams. There is another calendar worth looking at, too. The 50 Cent calendar. Because while Rick Ross was signing mortgages, 50 Cent was signing development deals. While Rick Ross was refinancing a house, 50 Cent was closing the Star's renegotiation and putting the ownership date on the internet as a receipt. While Rick Ross was expanding his wing footprint, 50 Cent was announcing a 9-figure Louisiana partnership. While Rick Ross was booking podcast appearances, 50 Cent was booking sound stages. 2 calendars, 2 philosophies, 1 outcome. And now the outcome is public. So here is where I hand it to you. Do you think Rick Ross can climb out of this before the depression stage locks in? Do you think 50 Cent will finally pull the trigger on whatever paperwork he has been holding? Or do you think the caption war is the whole strategy? Talk to me in the comments. Drop your verdict below. I read every one. And while you are down there, tell me one more thing. Who do you think is next on the list? Because if the template is real, the second demonstration is already being drafted. And the third, and the fourth. Somebody in this industry is scrolling through this exact video right now with a nervous look on their face. I want to know who you think it is. Tag them in the comments. Let us find out together. And one more question, because I have been thinking about this all week and I want to hear your take. If Rick Ross had responded to the Wings joke with a laugh instead of a live stream, does any of this happen? If Rick Ross had smiled at the caption instead of jumping in a pool, does 50 Cent even have a runway to press the next button? Or was the pool video the exact moment Rick Ross handed 50 Cent the keys to the rest of the year? I have my answer. Tell me yours in the comments. Because sometimes the biggest business mistakes in this culture are not the ones made in a boardroom. Sometimes the biggest business mistakes are the ones made in a swimming pool at high noon in front of a live camera. If this breakdown gave you something nobody else on the timeline handed you this week, do me a small favor. Hit subscribe. Ring the bell. Share this with one person who still thinks this whole situation is about an album, because it never was. And if you want the next chapter of the case file the moment new paperwork surfaces, stay locked in with me right here. I am watching every corporate registry, every court filing, every mortgage refinance, every tour cancellation, and every quiet trust transfer. I will bring it to you first, because the paper trail does not stop when the video ends. The paper trail keeps filing while the world keeps scrolling. And I want you in the room when the next filing drops. Lights off. Case closed. See you at the next one.